Hey everyone, and welcome back. Are you ready to dive into some thought-provoking stuff today?
Always up for a good mental workout.
Okay, perfect, because today we're looking at this article. It's called Cafeteria Christianity in the Banks of Babylon on bathrooms, usury, and the true gospel.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
I know, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's by Jamie Hoerricks.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's it all about?
Well, the thing that really grabbed me is how it starts with like this really personal story.
Okay.
It's about this transgender traveler going through the Texas bathroom laws.
Oh, wow. I've heard those laws are pretty intense.
Yeah, and can you imagine like dealing with that in a place like the DFW airport?
Oh, man. Talk about stressful.
Right. But the thing is, it's not just about bathrooms. This experience kind of launches Hoerricks into this whole exploration of social justice and hypocrisy.
I see. So it's using this personal anecdote to talk about, like, bigger issues.
Exactly. It makes you think about like how people pick and choose what they believe, right?
Yeah, like when it comes to religion and stuff.
Exactly. And that's where Hoerricks brings up this idea of cafeteria Christianity.
Cafeteria Christianity. That's a new one for me.
So basically, Hoerricks argues that certain groups, particularly on the Christian far right, they kind of engage in this selective interpretation of the Bible.
Oh, I see. Like picking and choosing what parts they agree with.
Yeah, and it's not always clear cut. Like there are genuine theological debates about how to interpret different verses in their historical context.
Right.
But Hoerricks points out this pattern of prioritizing certain social issues,
And those would be?
often stuff related to sexuality.
Okay.
But they seem to sidestep these economic justice issues that are super prominent in the Bible.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, for instance, there's a lot of talk about condemning LGBTQ plus individuals based on certain verses.
Right.
But what about all those verses about helping the poor, about challenging the wealthy, and fighting against greed and exploitation?
You don't hear as much about those, do you?
Nope. It's like they get conveniently overlooked.
Interesting. It's almost like they're picking and choosing what fits their worldview instead of grappling with, like, the whole text, you know?
Right. And that brings up another point that Hoerricks makes.
Okay, what's that?
It's not just about ignoring certain verses. It's about the contrast between the lives of some of these prominent Christian figures today,
Okay.
especially those who are preaching this prosperity gospel.
Right, the whole health and wealth thing.
Yeah, exactly. And comparing that to the life of Jesus.
You mean like Jesus who lived in poverty?
Exactly. And who was constantly challenging the wealthy and powerful
Yeah.
and spoke out against accumulating riches.
It's a pretty stark difference.
Right. So you have this prosperity gospel that says wealth is a sign of God's favor.
Yeah, like if you're rich, God loves you.
But then you have Jesus who lived a completely different way.
It makes you wonder, huh?
It really does. And that's one of the things that Hoerricks is pointing out.
It seems like they're saying there's this disconnect between what some parts of Christianity are teaching and the actual teachings and life of Jesus.
Exactly. And it leads into one of the most fascinating parts of their argument,
Which is?
the Bible's stance on usury.
Oh, now that's an interesting one.
I have to admit, I'm not even totally sure what usury is.
Well, basically, it's like charging excessive interest on loans.
So like those payday loan places.
Exactly. With those crazy interest rates that trap people in debt.
Wow. I never thought of it that way. So what does the Bible actually say about that?
It's actually pretty clear in condemning usury.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Hoerricks points to all these passages.
Like where?
Well, both Old and New Testaments, like in Ezekiel and Proverbs. They specifically talk about exploiting the poor through debt.
I guess I never really made that connection between faith and economic justice before.
Yeah, it's not something you hear about every day.
And to make things even more thought-provoking, Hoerricks reminds us about these laws in ancient Israel.
What kind of laws?
Laws to prevent this kind of economic disparity. They even had this thing called the Jubilee year.
Jubilee year. I've never heard of
Wow.
that.
So every 50 years, all debts were forgiven.
Wow, seriously.
And land was returned to the original owners. Even slaves were set free.
That's amazing. It's like hitting a reset button on the whole system.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
Makes you think about our current system and how we approach debt.
It really does. Like, what if we saw debt not just as an individual problem, but like a systemic issue?
Right. Like, what if we needed a reset every now and then? It's a fascinating concept to consider.
Absolutely. And those are the kinds of questions that Hoerricks wants us to grapple with. They're pointing out this idea of economic justice that was championed in ancient Israel.
With the Jubilee year and all that.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder about the role of modern institutions, like churches, for example.
Oh, I see where this is going.
And that's where Hoerricks takes us next.
It's almost like we've lost sight of that ancient wisdom about economic fairness, you know?
Right. And that leads us right into Hoerricks' take on megachurches.
Oh boy, here we go.
Well, they see these huge, opulent churches as like symbols of wealth and straying from the whole humble service thing that Jesus is all about.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Some pastors living these lavish lifestyles while preaching about poverty.
Yeah, and asking their congregations, who are often struggling themselves, to make these sacrificial givings. It just seems so off from what Jesus actually taught.
Right. It makes you question what the purpose of the church is today.
Exactly. Is it about building community and helping those in need? Or is it more about power and money? That's what Hoerricks really makes you think about.
And then there's the whole tax-exempt status thing.
Oh, yeah.
If some churches aren't really giving back to the community in a meaningful way, why should they get those tax breaks?
It's a valid point. This whole thing highlights the disconnect between the image of the church as this charitable force and how some churches actually operate.
Especially the ones with tons of money.
Exactly.
So Hoerricks is basically saying that this focus on certain social issues, like transgender rights, might be a distraction.
Oh, a smokescreen.
Yeah, to keep us from focusing on the bigger problems, like economic injustice.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is. But they make a strong case. They're calling for a real shift in priorities within the Christian community.
To focus on things like predatory lending and the wealth gap.
Exactly. They want Christians to tackle these systemic problems head on. It's not just criticism, though. It's also about offering a different path forward.
One based on justice, compassion, and really taking care of everyone.
I'm really struck by how Hoerricks brings in their own background into all of this.
Oh, yeah.
They come from a non-Christian background, but they've studied world religions like crazy.
So they have this outsider perspective, but also a deep understanding of religion.
Exactly. It makes their viewpoint really unique and insightful. So it's like they're not just critiquing the far right's interpretation of Christianity.
They're offering a different way of looking at Jesus himself.
Exactly. They're saying that Jesus was this radical figure who challenged the status quo and stood up for the marginalized.
It's funny how we often forget about that side of him.
Right. We kind of sanitize him into this peaceful, loving figure.
But he was also a disruptor, challenging authority and standing up for the oppressed. And he was poor and marginalized himself.
It's so important to remember that historical context.
It is. And Hoerricks does a great job of weaving it into their analysis of modern-day issues. They even call out the Christian far right for what they call selective morality.
They're basically saying that they've abandoned the biblical call to help the poor and challenge the rich.
Oof. That's a strong statement.
It is. You know, there's this quote from the Gospel of Thomas that Hoerricks shares that really stuck with me.
What's the quote?
Whoever has come to know the world has discovered a carcass. It's such a powerful image.
It really is. It makes you rethink your priorities. Like, what do we truly value in life?
Right. Is it all about wealth and possessions? Or is there something more?
It goes back to that question of what a true Christian message looks like in today's world. Are we more focused on individual success or on compassion and justice for everyone?
Makes you wonder what Jesus would be saying about all this if he was around today.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And that's what Hoerricks leaves us with.
Like, if Jesus was walking around now, what would he be fighting for? What systems would he be trying to change?
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. This whole deep dive has been quite a journey.
It has.
We started with those personal experiences at the airport, and now we're talking about deep theological questions of social and economic justice.
And Hoerricks doesn't just point out the problems. They actually offer a way forward.
Yeah, they challenge us to rethink our assumptions about faith and justice.
And what it really means to love your neighbor.
It's not about forcing our beliefs on others.
Right. It's about creating a world where everyone can thrive and have dignity.
It all comes back to that powerful statement that Hoerricks makes.
Which one?
Loving thy neighbor isn't about policing identities. It's about protecting their dignity and ensuring their well-being.
That's such a powerful idea, and it goes beyond any one religion.
It really does. It's like a universal desire for fairness and compassion.
Taking care of those who need it most.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about, that's for sure.
Me too. I think that's what makes these deep dives so valuable.
They force us to confront these complex ideas and challenge our own perspectives.
And hopefully it inspires us to take action.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about learning stuff. It's about using that knowledge to make the world better.
Couldn't agree more. So what really stood out to you from all of this?
That's a good question. What will I take away from Hoerricks and apply to my own life?
That's the real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, we can't just sit back and absorb information. We have to wrestle with it, let it challenge us, and then figure out how to actually live it.
Well said.
Hmm?
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those questions. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep searching for truth.